be going through some of the points in Samach Aleph, Samach Beis, Samach Daled, Samach Hey. Not going to go through everything, but some of the points that I feel are important to our Negeya. A lot of it is details and minhagim. A lot of it is important halachic yesodis that are important to know before we move on to other topics. Siman Nun Hey discussed the dinim of the Choppa. Siman Samach Aleph continues back to the dinim of Choppa. The opening statement of the Mechaber in Siman Samach Aleph is at the moment the Mekudeshes is brought into the Choppa, she is his wife. Even if there was no bia, she's still, because that according to Mechaber L'Shitasei, according to Shitas Rambam, Choppa is the kinyan, that's what completes the nisuin, and therefore the woman becomes mekudeshes, and the woman becomes nesua at the moment she enters the Choppa. There's a discussion in the Mishnah Melech in the Rambam Hilchasishus Perek Yud Halacha Beis. Same thing is also in the Radbaz. What is exactly this? Since we're discussing the Shidduch of the Rambam, what is exactly this kinyan that we're talking about over here? Does this Choppa complete the kinyan? And how exactly does this work? The question that they're discussing is whether, if there was a Choppa before Kiddushin, if there was Knisa the Choppa before Kiddushin, does it work or does it not work? That means, will the Choppa work if the Yichud came first and then the Kiddushin, or the Choppa will not work if the Kiddushin came beforehand, if the Kiddushin came afterwards? Say the Radbaz and say the Mishnah Melech. Actually, the Mishnah Melech mainly proves from the Ramban and from the Ritva. From the Ramban and the Ritva discussing Kiddushin through Bia, that a Choppa, that if Kiddushin, if the Yichud, the Bia, happened after the Choppa, that means the Kiddushin, the Maisa Kiddushin happened after the Choppa, then she is Mekudeshes, and this Kiddushin and Nisuin, because there was a Choppa, even though the Kiddushin came after the Maisa of the Choppa. That is how the Mishnah Melech understood and he proves from it that therefore there is if Kiddushin happened after Choppa, after Nisuin, it still works, even if the Seder is changed. The Beis Shmuel brings from the Masas Binyamin with Apshitis, the Bechal doesn't mention, not the Ramban, not the Ritva, that it's nothing. There's no, if that's nothing but the Kiddushin that came after the Choppa, you can't say that the Choppa is valid to create Nisuin. So right now she's Mekudeshes, she's not Nesua, and the Choppa still has to happen. It's based on the Masas Binyamin. The Shar HaMelech on the Rambam discusses this topic, and he says that he doesn't understand how people looked at it. There's a machlokes. There's no machlokes over here. It's not the Beis Shmuel is not the one who's cholik on the Mishnah Melech. Is each one has rishonim that are brought as a proof. There's able to prove from Tosfos and Rashba, you could be medayik that it's not kind that Choppa which came, that Nisuin which came before Kiddushin are invalid. The Shar HaMelech says that it's not Bechar, it doesn't understand what the argument is. Everybody holds that if we're talking about a Kiddushin he says everybody would agree that Kiddushin that are done with a Tabas before, that are done after the Choppa, the Choppa that came before this Kiddushin has no effect. The reason why the Ritva and the Ramban say that Kiddushin that came after the Choppa works is only in Kiddushin Bia. And the reason is because the fact that there is Bia means that there is Yichud. If there is yichud, means there is a chuppah. So the chuppah and the kiddushin are boim ka'echad. The chuppah that happened before the kiddushin, the yichud that happened before the kiddushin, which is the bia, is not the chuppah which we're relying on. The fact that they're doing bia is the act of kiddushin. It's also the chuppah at the same. It's also the chuppah at the same time. The yichud which makes the chuppah. So kiddushin and nisun are coming together, and you can't use that as a proof that kiddushin that came before the chuppah, the kiddushin that came after nisuin, the nisuin should still work. This is an exception to the rule because by bia you have the nisuin at the same time. Anyways, you have the chuppah / yichud, whatever it is, at the same time. And the Masas Binyamin, that is Machmer, is talking about the case of a Chupas Almana. By a Chupas Almana, you have to have actual Yichud. Afterwards, just the Chuppah is not kind. So therefore, he says that you have that if there was a Kiddush, if there was Nisuin before Kiddushin, it doesn't work.
Why not? Why
by Almana, Stam Chuppah is not enough. By Almana, you need actual yichud to not just machnisa to work. That's halacha. By Almana is different.
What's the chiluk? By when there's bia after the chuppah, so you have kiddushin.
When there's bia and there was no kiddushin, there was bia after the chuppah.
Which is now being counted as kiddushin.
Kiddushin, and obviously the bia is done in a place, not publicly. So therefore, there's also yichud. So there's chuppah. So there's bia, which is kiddushin. Is not really the chuppah. You have the chuppah and the bia, and the kiddushin and the nisuin baim ka'echad.
And by Almana?
It says the Masas Binyamin that writes that chuppah before kiddushin doesn't work. He's talking about a chuppah of an almana where there is no where l'kuli alma that chuppah does not work without yichud. So even if you want to say that there was some sort of that the chuppah that was before has some effect in regular, he's not discussing. He says over there,
I don't understand, but it doesn't. The whole reason he's saying that the chuppah of the works after. Even though the happened, the real chuppah is happening in Mishas Nabiyah when there's yichud.
That's why he basically says that you can't prove anything from one or the other. He says you can't create now a machloikas between all these people because they're discussing different topics and different situations, and l'chayra they would all be moed, and you can't prove from one. You can't prove from the Ritva and from the Ramban that chuppah, that nisuin before kiddushin does work, and you can't prove from the Masas Binyamin that nisuin before kiddushin doesn't work. You can't prove from either of them because the Ramban and the Ritva are talking about kiddush bias over there. The nisuin before the nisuin did not happen before kiddushin, but the kiddushin happened together with the nisuin. So therefore, you can't prove anything from there. And what the Masas Binyamin is talking about, he's talking about a case of Chupas Almana where there's anyways the Chuppah is not really a mice, the Chuppah itself is not koine, only the Yichud afterwards is koine. So you can't use the Masas Binyamin to prove that a Chuppah before Kiddushin does not work. He doesn't tell you that it's for sure that it does work or for sure it doesn't work. He says you can't use these as a proof. Not one way and not the other way. So we're left with a question. The question stays. The answers that were given and the proofs that were brought are not good enough proofs. Not one way and not the other way. So you're back to the question, and the question stays. What happens if it's a chuppah, if there is a chuppas besula, and afterwards there is kiddushin with a tabas, does it work or not? We don't know. That's on the Shah Melech's view. A lot of most poskim take Masas Binyamin with a pshittis that it does not work, and the chuppah has to be done after kiddushin again. What's an afkamina between whether the chuppah, whether we say that if you machnas arasosei to the chuppah, then she becomes your wife. That means that if the husband dies before there was bia, she could collect her ksuba. But according to the Rambam, it only works if it's a chuppah haruya l'bia. Because according to the Rambam, the chuppah is the yichud that comes afterwards. And if the yichud only works if it's haruya l'bia. So if she's a nida, and this is the entry point to the discussion of chuppah's nida, and there was kiddushin, and there was chuppah, and there was even yichud, she's still not considered fully his wife, because there was no yichud haroy l'bia. She's asura to him. The Beis Shmuel points out, obviously this is only according to the Rambam, because the Rambam holds that the yichud, that the chuppah is a yichud which is a yichud which is in a place in Mokim Seiser v'chulu where it's going to lead to bia. And we know that if a woman is a nida and there was never be'ilah between them, a regular chuppah's nida, there was never a bia, so then they're asurim beyichud. So the yichud that the Rambam expects to happen is not just a yichud, it's a yichud with bia afterwards, obviously. And the yichud with the chuppah's nida is also. So therefore, the nisuin were never completed. That's why, according to the Rambam, chuppah's nida is a big problem. Then there's a whole discussion, what would happen according to the Rambam if, in different scenarios, let's say that she is on the 7th day, the chuppah came out on the 7th day, so the chuppah was done before Shkia. She's going to go to the mikveh that night at some point. So therefore, it becomes a discussion if she's considered that the yichud of the chuppah is any roy l'bia or not, is roy l'bia or not. Did it kick in or not? Rabbi Akiva Eiger says, "Meken zich dingen," that after it's not. Maybe according to the Rambam, it will not work, because later is going to be, the fact that later she's going to become yichud haroy l'bia is not enough. But that's what Rabbi Akiva Eiger says in Chidush. And Rabbi Akiva Eiger over here, on the actual Shulchan Aruch, explains why it's not so. He explains that even if it's on the 7th day, he proves from the Ran that it's not a problem. Then there's a different machlokes. This is discussing.
If she doesn't die before the first mitzvah, and then they do the first mitzvah and do yichud, so that then chufah is chal.
Yeah.
You only need to whatever.
I'm not sure about that. I don't remember. I don't think you need Eidim then. Well, he says the chuppah doesn't kick in. There has to be a chuppah later. That means you should not do a chuppah. A chuppah's nida. It becomes a shafet, but the it works or not. Right. So I'm saying is if there was no yichud haroy l'bia, so later it's going to have to be a yichud haroy l'bia.
It's not possible that a chuppah.
There's no chuppah. It's not called a chuppah. The wedding ceremony did not achieve the purpose of a chuppah. So you would need a yichud then. We pass like the Ramah. The Sefer HaMakne points out an important, interesting point. He says that even according to the Rambam, would only be a problem in the way chuppahs are done today, that are done in the shul, in the hall, in all these places. I'm talking about Sefer HaMakne a long time ago, but even then he says, if there was a hichnisa lebeisoi, hichnisa l'rishusoi, then according to the Rambam, that's a different, even according to the Rambam, it still works. Because the chuppah / yichud is when there was no achnisa l'beisei. If there's achnisa l'beisei, she should still be considered ishtay. That's what Sefer HaMakne. Chalkas Mechagik disagrees with it and says it does not, achnisa l'rishus does not work according to the Rambam in the case of chuppah's nida. Now, the other interesting argument that has to do with chuppah's nida is the machlokes between the Shara Melech, which discussed, and the Shara Melech brings different opinions on an interesting question. If she's not a nida midiraisa, that means she's only a nida because of a kesem. So she's only nida midiraban. Midiraisa, she's muteres l'bayla. Midiraisa, there's yichud haroy l'bia. Only midirabanan, there's no yichud haroy l'bia. Because she's only nida midirabanan. So he brings both. He brings opinions one way or the other. Seems like the Shara Melech is noted to say that even by a chupas nida, even if she's a nida midirabanan, according to the Rambam, it still will not work, because sof kol sof they're not going to be misyached. Sof kol sof there's no chibas biyah, and therefore it's not. But he mentions that there are those that hold that in such a scenario, the Rambam would agree that a chupas nida would work if there's yichud afterwards. Forget about the discussion, because this is all a question. Obviously, l'chatchila shouldn't be, according to the Rambam, shouldn't be chupas nida in the Rabbanan. L'chatchila shouldn't be a yichud. This whole discussion is if there was a yichud afterwards. The other interesting argument that you have over here is mentioned in the Chalkas Mechayik right in the beginning of the Siman. If she entered the Chuppah while she was tahir, and then she became a nida, did it kick in or not? And the Chalkas Mechayik brings the Machlekes. It depends if Chuppah is kind of betchila or besof. The Chalkas Mechayik tells you, according to some opinions, the Chuppah is kind of betchila, and therefore the Chuppah kicked in according to the Rambam, and according to the Mordechai, it does not. The Chuppah does not kick in because Chuppah is only kind of levasayf. The Chalkas Mechayik says it's still in all. This will only apply if it was b'shas vesta. If it was shalai b'shas vesta, even the Mordechai would be moide that there is no that the Chuppah is kind of. Why? Because b'poyel she was Roi, the Chuppah was Re'uya L'biyah at that moment. And there are those that explain that the reason behind it is because if you're talking about Shas Vesta, and you want to argue that even, because according to the way the Chalkas Mechayik says is that if it was B'shas Vesta, the way he explains the Mordechai B'shas Vesta, the Mordechai would say that she's not, that the Chuppah does not work. Why does the Chuppah not work? Because she's not Roi L'biyah at that moment. And if it's Shalei B'shas Vesta, it's a Yichud Roi L'biyah, so it does work. There are those that explain that even B'shas Vesta, she's still Roi L'biyah, because there is Shittis and there is a Svara that Beilas Mitzvah is mutter even b'shas Vesta. Not that we pass like that, but Beilas Mitzvah is mutter b'shas Vesta, and therefore, if there's no actual, if the Vestas didn't come, and therefore it was a Yichud Haroi L'biyah, and therefore, the chiluk of the Chalkas Mechayik doesn't apply. The Ma'aseh, this all is not negeya to us that we pass like the Ramah Chupas Nida. The Chupas Nida does work.
Isn't the whole point because of the chilas biyah, it's lacking when it's not really the biyah?
Yeah, when there's no.
Does that completely go away when the chassan knows about it, and now Imkozei goes forward with the chuppah?
That's what at the end of the Siman it says that he's supposed to tell him.
Even I don't know if anyone still follows this last Rambam.
L'chatchila, yeah. Some people still follow Shulchan Aruch l'chatchila. The people at Kach Zechon Shulchan Aruch.
That l'chatchila, if he knows about it, and even l'chatchila, it's fine.
If there's no chibas biyah, you still have a yichud. You still don't have a yichud aroi l'biyah. There's no yichud. According to the Rambam, there's no yichud. There's always a surim b'yichud.
But the schayvus, which is the kinyan that's happening, could happen without chibas biyah if he's coming.
But how are you going to deal with a yichud when there are surim b'yichud? How are you going to get a chopper according to the Rambam, which is yichud, if you don't have a yichud? There has to be a yichud, and there's no yichud because there was a shomer. If they did a chupas nida and there's a shomer and everything else, they did it properly. So then there was never any proper yichud.
Why is it good to tell the chassan beforehand? In terms of the kinyan, what are you gaining out of it?
Of course, that's for the shit of the Rambam. It's for the second shit. The Mechaber l'chayr, it seems like it's more for the second. He should know what's going on. It's good to tell him. He should not be.
It's just sound like he shouldn't be shocked, or it sounds like because like that you avoid you avoid the shaila of the shaila of chibas nida, but you still don't solve the yichud problem. The problem is you still have the yichud issue in place.
Now, the other discussion is, if we say yichud aroi lebiyah because everything leads, it's going to lead to a biyah in the end, why does this apply only to if she's a nida, or also if she's sick and there's not shaykh to be biyah? There's an interesting Ben Ish Chai that says, I think it's a Ben Ish Chai? No, it's a Shashu Mishpatim Yesharim in the Spor and the Pesach Tshuva, that being that there is a specific time when she's going to be tahir, so therefore, even if we say that the chupas nida, even if we say that the people that hold that chupas nida is kaina, is because there's going to be a time when it's going to be solved. But if there's some sort of illness which is preventing biyah, and there's no known time, or there's no known specific time when it's going to work, when there's going to be biyah, then it's a shaila, even according to the shittas that hold that chupas nida does work. There's a shaila if it's going to work in such a scenario or not. The Rama uses this seif to start discussing a bunch of other dinim which are relevant to the chuppah. We're going to go through them quickly. First of all, the ksubah has to be written before the chuppah, and this is obviously the shittas Rambam. The Rama is talking about the shittas Rambam. Why? Because according to the Rambam, you have to have yichud. If you don't have a ksubah, you're asurim b'yichud. So there's not going to be a chuppah aroy yichud, a yichud aroy l'biyah. But the Chalkas B'chayik points out, but yeah, it'll still work, even according to the Rambam. Now the Bar Heitev brings from the Tshuvas HaGeonim that there's a discussion. What happens if the ksubah was written before the chuppah, and then there was a psul found in the ksubah after the chuppah, and you see that the ksubah is completely pasul, you're not going to say that the chuppah retroactively is batul because there was no yichud aroy l'biyah. No, and the same thing for ket. If there was a psul in the kiddushin, for whatever reason it was, and the ksubah remains kosher, you don't have to write a new ksubah. The logic is not mentioned in the Bar Heitev, but the logic is very simple. Ksubah is chayvus of money. This chayvus of money will not disappear if the shtar has a psul in it. You're just going to make a new shtar. The same thing, the chayvus of money is not going to disappear if there was a problem with the kiddushin, if they discovered afterwards that one of the edim is goyim, or the tabas wasn't his, or whatever the issue was afterwards. So the ksubah will remain. It doesn't. If afterwards is discovered, the fact you have to write a ksubah according to the Rambam, it must be written. It must be written before. Because otherwise you don't have a yichud aroy l'biyah. But if there's some issue happens afterwards which creates a problem to the kiddushin, or creates a problem to the ksubah remains, the kiddushin, not the kiddushin, if it creates a problem for the yichud, for the chuppah will remain kosher, even if the ksubah is found to be pasul, or the ksubah will remain kosher, even if the chuppah will be found to be pasul, or the kiddushin, not if the kiddushin, if the chuppah will be found to be pasul. The Rama then says, obviously, now that we paskin that there is that chupas nida is koine, even then the minig is to write before the chuppah. And the Aruch HaShulchan tells you that today that our minig is the minig Ashkenaz, Shittas Arosh, that we read the ksubah between the kiddushin and nisuin. So obviously you have to write the ksubah beforehand, because otherwise you're not going to have what to read between the chuppah, between the kiddushin and the nisuin. So you obviously have to write it. Some people have a minhag to sign the ksubah under the chuppah between the kiddushin and the nisuin, not only to read it, but also to actually, the kinyan is done under the chuppah. That depends on which communities you're from. The minhagim are different. You will see such minhagim happening in certain scenarios. If there was a chuppah and there was no Sheva brachas, the chuppah is still kosher. You do it. You could do the bracha even after a few days. We discussed 2 days ago what it is. The chatchila, you're supposed to make the brachas before the yichud. Our minhag is that it's done under the chuppah, but before cheder yichud. It means after reading the ksubah. Before going to Cheder Yichud, that's when the Sheva brachas are made under under the chuppah. The Rama continues the minhag of the whole minhag Ashkenaz that the chassan and kala fast on the day of the wedding. There's different reasons for it, whether it's because of Yom Kapara or because that they should not get drunk, etc. And this is old Ashkenaz minhag the nafkamina between the two timim is, and we're makel both ways, is if the chuppah is done before shkia, we eat after the chuppah, even though it's a yom tainus. Why? Because we follow the second reason, that it's because they shouldn't get drunk or whatever it is. And the Shulchan Aruch also flips it the other way. If there was a long delay in the chuppah and you see that the chuppah is not going to start till very late at night, and it's already after Seder Kechavim, you could break the fast before. The chuppah. By the Sfardim, there's no kamina kavua about fasting. It depends on which communities you come from. Some communities, the chassan and the kala fast. Some communities, the chassan and the kala fast the day before the chuppah, not the day of the chuppah. Some of them have the minhag that only the chassan fasts, but not the kala, so the kala should not look pale at the chassan, and the chassan might have an incentive to change his mind. There are those that fast, that the parents also, that's Sfardim Ashkenazim, the Rebbeim, the Frierdiker Rebbe fasted the day of his kid's wedding, even though it's not a Hoyro L'Rabim, so they don't do it. Now the day of the chuppah, being that it's a Yom, it's like Yom Kippur, it's very important that the chassan should daven mincha before the chuppah, so that way he could say vidui, whatever has to be done before the chuppah, because once the chuppah comes in, the same reason why you could break your fast, that it becomes a yom tiv, the same reason why you're not going to be able to say vidui afterwards. If it's a day like Rosh Chodesh, which is a asur b'tainus, there are those that say that you don't do vidui, there are those that say that you do vidui, there are those that say that you have to be mashlim the tainus on a different day. There are those that say you don't have to be mashlim the tainus on a different day. That depends. Each community has their own minhag. The last thing that the Rambam points out over here is that the chuppah has to be, in the Sif Aleph, is the chuppah has to be done under, the minhag is to do it under Kippas HaShamayim. It becomes an argument, what does Kippas HaShamayim mean? It's the Levushi Mordechai, Shasru's Levushi Mordechai says that if it's under a glass roof, it does not count as Tachas Kippas HaShamayim. There are those that say that it does work. If you look in Shasru's Divrei Malkiel, he discusses those that you open up the roof. You'll see certain shuls where you could open up the roof to make a chuppah. He says if you open up the roof enough that it's an actual opening, then it's considered Tachas Kippas HaShamayim. But if it's less than Gimel Tfachim, it's as if it was never opened, and you're still under a roof. And the reason it should be brachas. One of the reasons is Oid Yishama Be'are Yehuda v'chutzos Yerushalayim. Chutzos does not mean indoors. The whole discussion of Chupas Nida begins in Seif Beis. Mainly over there, the Mechaber says that she should get married when she is tahir. L'chatchila, that they should try that she should get married when she is tahir. The Taz says even though we paskin that Chupas Nida is kaina, l'chatchila should still try to avoid Chupas Nida, because a lot of Rishonim disagree and say that, not a lot, but quite a few Rishonim that hold that Chupas Nida is not kaina. The Rebbeim or makpid dafka to yes have Chupas Nida, and so it looks like it was dafka to have. We definitely were not makpid to not, but it seems like the akpada was dafka to yes have. That's what it seems like. The Ramah says the minhag is already not to wait. You make the chasna right away. The reason why you don't wait, the Chalkas Mechaykik points out because Shema Yakdimenu Acher. The Igros Moshe says, don't delay it too much. And we as Lubavitchers, we know the Rebbe's letters that you make the wedding as early as possible, not because of Shema Yakdimenu Acher, but because of Shema Yakdimenu Yetzahara. So to say it in a nice way, and therefore, if Chupas Nid is going to cause a lengthy delay, that's the only reason for delay, then you don't you don't delay the chuppah for that. You don't delay the chuppah for that reason. In Siman Samach Beis, it discusses the dinim of Sheva brachas. The Mechaber says you make the Sheva brachas in the house of the chassan, which in today, what we're talking about in the wedding, it means under the chuppah. And the Mechaber says you do it koidem nisuin, before the nisuin, but we do it already under the chuppah. And there, the Mechaber tells you there are 6 brachas. How does it become Sheva brachas? Because the Mechaber says if you have wine, you also do a paragraph, and that's how it becomes 7. We're going to soon discuss the if you have wine part. The minig by certain communities is that the Gadol Shabachabura, the Gadol Ador, makes all 7 brachas. The minig by Lubavitch is that you spread it out between the families. It could be relatives also, it's not a problem. And the reason is it's based on it says that when Adam Arishan married Chava, the Eibishter Vayvarech Oisam, and he was the greatest gadol. He was the greatest gadol. There was nobody else available, and the Eibishter did the brachas, but he was the greatest gadol. Still is the greatest gadol. So today we look for those opinions are. You look for the greatest person in the area, and he should make the Sheva brachas. The Bishul Tshuva brings that I think I mentioned it in the past. The mevarech has to have in mind that the chassan kala to be moitzi the chayva the chassan kala. He brings that from the Noda B'Yehuda. The Bishul Tshuva adds the chassan kala should also have in mind to be yoitze from the actual mevarech. And I think that in the Chidush agrees. He explains that there's no logic for it because it's birkas hashvach. Birkas hashvach, there's no need for kavanah. So if there was no kavanah, it still works. The Mechaber says if there is wine, you make Sheva bracha. You make the 7th bracha, the Be'er Priyagofen. That is only according to the Rambam. The Maisa, we follow the shit of the Rosh that wine is ma'akev. You want to make sure that there's wine. The Magen Avram says that it's not the Magen Avram. Sorry, the Moshe says that you have to be careful that the cups should be full of wine. It's a siman bracha. It's a good thing to have. It also points out that if the order of the brachas, if somebody skips a bracha, you don't cut him off in the middle after he says Baruch Atah Hashem. You will just let him finish the bracha, and you go back to say that our brachas is not ma'akev when it comes to Sheva brachas. The minig Ashkenaz is one who says Be'er Priyagofen does not drink from the wine, despite there are those, according to the Sfardim, he does drink for the wine. It happens to be that the minig Ashkenaz, the source of minig Ashkenaz, is already in Chuvas HaGaonim, and that you don't have to make a Be'er Priyagofen. The chassan kalam, when they drink, they don't have to drink the shir. The Mechaber continues, if there's no wine, you make a Sheva brachas on Chamar Medina, on Sheikhar, on beer. The Tur says that first, if there's no wine, take raisins, soak them, make raisin wine. Why? Because then you could say Be'er Priyagofen. Based on that logic, if you don't have wine, you could use grape juice, because you say Be'er Priyagofen on grape juice. It's very important to have the Be'er Priyagofen. If not, you can make a shahakal on something which is sheikhar. There's a whole discussion of sheikhar means sheikhar dafka, or anything which is chamar medina. But anything which has alcohol and is considered chamar medina, you could make Sheva brachas on that, and obviously you will be making a shahakal and not a Be'er Priyagofen. It's important to remember that.
The Rosh said that wine is ma'akev for wine, or the bracha?
No, the bracha on it's ma'akev for doing the Sheva brachas. You have to be able to make a kois, whether it's wine or it's sheikhar. That's how I understood it. That means you can't do the other 6 brachas without having a bracha on a cup of liquid, that chashuv liquid, whether it's wine or sheikhar or grape juice. In Siv Beis, the Mechaber says that you should not make a wedding of 2 sisters on the same. And the Mechaber says, the Rama points out, based on that, you do not make the wedding of 2 sisters on the same day. This is based on Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. Rabbi Yehuda Chassid also says that if you do two sisters on the same day, it's going to create problems for the zivug. But if it's done two separate days, it's obviously not a problem. It could be two sisters getting married one day after another. It's not considered me'arvim simcha b'simcha. The Ramah says over there that there was certain people say a minhag not to make in the same city two girls, even if not related, on the same night, because people are going to start talking. It's going to be Kinna and Ava. One person got a better wedding than the other one, and the Ramah says that we're not makpid on that. It's better to make that a poor girl should get married the same night as a rich girl, so at least she will be able to benefit from all the money that the rich guy is wasting on his daughter's wedding, and then the poor girl will also be able to have benefits from it. The bracha, Sheva brachas has to be done, the Mechaber says, and Sifdal has to be done in front of 10 people, and the Chassan is one of the 10. The Rashba and the Rashbash, and the Rashba Chilkav Siman Aleph Kuf Samach Zayin, and the Rashbash Siman Eish Samach Tzadik Gimel say that a city which does not have 10 men, you should not make any weddings, any chuppahs over there. They should travel to another place. Comes the Shiloh, what happens if the travel is not in the city, but if the travel is much more than the city, you have to travel out of the country. And the Trumas Hadeshin says that don't wait to push off the wedding until you'll be able to travel to a place where you have 10 people. Rather, do it without doing the Sheva brachas. The Sheva brachas, as we saw before, are not ma'akiv. When you find 10 people, you make Sheva brachas. The Ben Ish Chai says that you could, you could just do the same idea, but you should do, at least you could do Asher Bara, because that we see in the Mechaber, you could do Asher Bara. And the Ben Ish Chai says, they'll travel somewhere else and they'll see a chuppah, they should chassan in the collar, the husband and wife now already, they should have in mind to be Yitzeh from the Sheva brachas that somebody else is saying for some other couple. What happens if you don't have 10 and you're going to have to make a Sheva brachas afterwards? If you made Sheva brachas and you didn't realize that you don't have 10, Shaila is it b'diavad, did it kick in for you or not? The Neder Behuda says it does work b'diavad, and you don't have to afterwards find 10 and do Sheva brachas. And the Aruch HaShulchan and Sifrit Gimel says that even b'diavad, if there was no 10, it does not work. It's important to point out something that the Rebbe kachzach very strongly. If there's no separation, you cannot say simcha b'moiner. This is not from the Rebbe. This is from Sefer Chassidim. It's brought down in the Shulchan Aruch that it's a problem. You can't say simcha b'moiner when there's no separation between man and woman. Therefore, it's very important to make sure there's a mechitze, even if there's hetelim. Why, when they're sitting and eating, there's no separation between man and woman. When it comes to Sheva brachas, there should be a mechitze that the people say the brachas should not be seeing woman. In Sif Hey, you say at you make Sheva brachas at every meal that you do benching, which has 10 people. The question is how many days you do Sheva brachas. If it's an almond marrying an almana, it's only one day. If it's a bachur marrying an almana or an almond marrying a psul, you get all 7 days. The first day is counted as the day of the chuppah. So if the chuppah was done before shkia, that's counted as day 1, and then after shkia is already counted as day 2. So if Zayin goes to the discussion, you need panim chadashos. To make Sheva brachas afterwards, you need panim chadashos. What are panim? And the Ramah says that panim chadashos is even if he did not eat at the meal. All the poskim disagree with the Ramah and say every meal that you want to do Sheva brachas, you have to have a panim chadashos for that meal. What is a panim chadashos? And Sif Ches, the Mechaber says people that you will add more food for them, they were not at the wedding. Shabbos and Yom Tov are considered in itself as panim chadashos. However, that's only for night and day, not for shalosh sudas. Suda shlishis is not considered. The Ramah says that Suda shlishis is considered panim chadashos because the chassan gives a speech. Comes a machlokes between the poskim and the last generation. The Shas Chuvas Kinyan Torah and Divrei Yatzav say that the chassan's drasha only counts as panim chadashos if it's done in Suda shlishis. The Shas Chuvas Yisrael says that even if the drasha is done on weekdays. If the chassan is doing a drasha, it could also count as panim chadashos. The Maisa, I didn't see anybody that relies on the Shas Shuvas Aseret Shuvah to say that if you don't have a panim chadashos and the chassan gave a speech, that you would be able to count it as panim chadashos. Siman Samach Dal, I'm going to quickly go through just 3 points. A person who marries a besula has a chiyuv to be mesameach the besula for 7 days. He's asur to do any melacha. What is the reason why he's asur to do any melacha? Depends on what we assume, just based on the machloikus of whether a chassan is allowed to do davar ovid or not, comes out what are the reasons are for it. According to the Shas Shuvas Beis David and the Ben Ish Chai, you're not allowed to do anything, even a davar ovid, because he is doimet to a melech. Melech is not allowed to work, therefore he's also not allowed to work. Even davar ovid, it's not like chol hamoed. Shas Shuvas Minchas Elazar and the David of Mesharim say that the chassan is allowed to do davar ovid if the kala is moichel. Why? Because the chiyuv is chiyuv simcha to him sameach the kala. That's the reason for the 7 days. So that's the reason why he's not allowed to work. So if she's Michael, then he's allowed to work only davar ovid. The Chazon Ish says that anything, it's completely mutter because it is like chol hamoed. Sheva, the 7 days are like chol hamoed. Based on that, the Moshe Sternbuch writes, if it's like chol hamoed, you're not allowed to write. And the Shalos Shuvas Shevet HaLevi says, even though the Chazon Ish says it's like chol hamoed, doesn't mean you're not allowed to write. It means that you shouldn't be focused, spend your whole day writing. Siva Kala is mutter. Now, some people will think that maybe it's compared to Avelis and therefore Chas v'Shalom and therefore you're not allowed to make money. The answer is, you are allowed to, chassan is allowed to make money during these days, just not allowed to work. Therefore, if there's a shutef who's working for him, he's allowed to make money from it. He's not allowed to do any melacha, and he's not allowed to go out by himself. He needs a shomer with him at all times. If the chassan and the kala go together, some say that it's enough and there's no need for additional shmirah. Some say that there's no need. The Sheb Shem Zalman Auerbach said that if a chassan is going to miss, is not going to be able to find, can't make it to minyan because he can't find somebody to be a shomer, he could walk out of the house without a shomer, because it's probably on the way to shul he'll find somebody who's going to become his shomer, and don't use the shomer as an excuse why you're not going to a minyan. In Sif Beis, and I have 2 points and with that I'm finished. In Sif Beis, it says someone who's noise a be'ula only has 3 days of simcha. Question becomes very common: if a person is noise be'ulas atzmoi, what is the din? The Pischat Shuvah brings from Noida B'Yehuda that he has 1 day of Shabbat Barachas and 3 days of Simcha. Some say that he has a full 7 days of Shabbat Barachas and full 7 days of Simcha. And some say that if a Bocher marries a Be'ula, even if it's Be'ulas Atzmai, he always gets 7 days. Why? Since he's doing 7 days of Shabbat Barachas, what are you going to tell him? That the first 3 days, you're not allowed to work. The next 4 days, you have to go for Shabbat Barachas, but go work throughout the day and then come running for Shabbat Barachas. It doesn't work like that. So if you get all the 7 days for Shabbat Barachas, you also get all the 7 days for Simcha, which means you're off from work. And the Mechaber and the Rama over there says the Isha, the woman, has a right to be moichel her simcha. The last thing I wanted to say is from Seif Vav, after the Mechaber discusses over there, you're allowed to get married in Erev Shabbos. Happens to be the chasnas that Rebbeim wore. A lot of them wore in Erev Shabbos. That you don't make weddings on Chol HaMoed, except for Machzik Grushasi. It's a very important thing to say. Point out that it's asr to make a chasana on Chol HaMoed. I did have a specific case of a shaila of whether a chuppah was done, if there was a real chuppah in the beginning of shaila of Mamzeres. One of the rayas that was used to prove that this chuppah was not a kosher chuppah was because, aside from the fact that the wedding was done in a treifa restaurant, it was done on Chol HaMoed Sukkos. Chol HaMoed Pesach would have been a bigger problem, but it was done on Chol HaMoed Sukkos in a treifa restaurant. And that was one that was pointed out to one of the Rabbanim, one of the Poskim. He says not only were they over on the issur of doing a chuppah in a treif restaurant, they're also over on the issur of doing a chol hamoed. It's just two rayas that this guy was a real shaygetz, and therefore we should not, that was, aside for a lot of other sniffim. But just, I remember it when I saw it, that it's an important thing to point out. You will be able, these are the little things that you have to remember to be able, if you want to prove that somebody is not an Orthodox rabbi, these are some of the things that they will violate.